Before the awakening, the ego is the master of the house. It builds walls of identity, paints portraits of ambition, and arranges the furniture of belief so perfectly that one forgets it is only a stage, an elaborate performance. You thought you were the actor, but you were the costume, the job title, the accolades, the relationships you cultivated, even the pain you carried proudly like a badge. These were not you, but fragments of an image carefully maintained by the ego to feel real, valuable, and alive. But awakening is not a gentle breeze, it is a storm. It doesn't knock politely. It rips open the curtains and exposes the scaffolding behind the theater. Suddenly, the goals that once kept you driven, promotion, status, validation, dissolve like mist in morning light. They lose their flavor, not because they were wrong, but because they were never truly yours. They belong to the persona, the mask you wore to survive, to be loved, to be enough. What follows is disorientation. The ego, having lost its throne, panics. You may feel hollow, as if the fire that once fueled your every move has gone out. But it is not depression. It is detachment from illusion. The palace of ambition now looks like a prison. The applause you once sought now echoes with emptiness. And so, you wander through life in a quiet daze, not because you are lazy or broken, but because the lies that once gave you energy have burned away, and the truth, as liberating as it is, offers no instant substitute. This collapse is terrifying. It is not the end of motivation. It is the end of manipulation. For years, the ego whispered that your worth was in what you could prove, how much you could achieve, how many people admired you. But now, those voices grow silent. What replaces them is not a roar but a silence, a stillness that the ego interprets as death. Yet this silence is not death. It is space. A vast, unfamiliar space where nothing is dictated and everything must be rediscovered. You no longer want to climb the mountain you once swore you'd conquer. You no longer care to be seen by eyes that are blind to the soul. And this apathy, this collapse of the old fire, feels like failure in a world that worships forward motion. But it is not failure. It is awakening. It is the realization that what once moved you was not your essence, but a system of beliefs designed to protect the ego's fragile illusion of control. And so, you drift. You look at your goals with suspicion. You observe your habits like a scientist, detached and analytical. You begin to see that most of what drove you was fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being forgotten, fear of disappearing into the anonymity of ordinary life. But in this stillness, something begins to stir. A question, not a command. What is real? And the answer, if it comes at all, will not come through the ego. It will rise from the unconscious like a dream breaking through the fog. But until then, you wait in the ruins of the empire the ego built, unsure of what to build next, unsure even if building is necessary. Because sometimes the soul does not want to construct. It wants to listen, to feel, to remember what it knew before the ego convinced it to forget. And so you stand among the ruins, not lost but stripped, not broken but bare. The illusion is gone, the mask is off, and the world, once so loud with meaning, is now quiet, too quiet, and in that silence, the human being does not arrive in the world with a solid identity. It is pieced together like a patchwork quilt, stitched from the expectations of parents, the judgments of society, the rewards of conformity, and the punishments for authenticity. Slowly, unknowingly, you become what is acceptable, what is admired, what is tolerated. You wear the names others give you, the smart one, the obedient one, the strong one, the beautiful one, the sinner, the success, the disappointment. And in time, you begin to believe these labels are you. This false identity is not born from malice. It is born from survival. As children, we do not ask, "Who am I?" but rather who do I need to be in order to be loved. And thus begins the betrayal of the self, the quiet abandoning of the soul in favor of the persona. You build an image, you decorate it, you reinforce it with habits, language, rituals, and beliefs. It becomes your armor, but over time the armor becomes a cage. Then awakening happens, not like a lightning bolt, but like erosion, a steady, uncomfortable peeling away of all that is inauthentic. The mask no longer fits. The old motivations feel foreign. The roles you played begin to lose their script. You walk into rooms and feel like a stranger in your own skin. Your laughter feels rehearsed. Your words sound hollow. And you can no longer pretend that what once satisfied you still holds meaning. This is the death of the false identity, not a gentle death, a slow, disorienting unraveling. The ego mourns it like the loss of a loved one. It tries to resurrect it through nostalgia, pride, or denial. But something deeper within you knows it is gone, and what's left in its place? Not clarity, not joy, not some sudden spiritual elevation, but a raw and terrifying absence. A blank space where you once were. You are no longer who you thought you were, and yet you don't know who you are becoming. The scaffolding of your personality collapses, and all that is left is sensation, grief, confusion, numbness. You try to speak, but the words are dry. You try to explain yourself, but there is no self to explain. This is not depression. This is not a breakdown. This is ego death, and it is holy. The people around you may not understand. They still see the costume, but they don't realize the actor has left the stage. They tell you to go back to being who you were, but you cannot. You know now that it was never real. You mourn the death of a self that never truly existed. You grieve for the years spent upholding a lie, not out of deceit, but out of necessity. You feel anger, perhaps, at the world that rewarded your mask and punished your essence, but eventually even the anger fades. This death is not elegant, it is awkward. It shows up in forgotten passions, in friendships that quietly dissolve, in habits that feel suddenly pointless. You stand in the middle of a life you once built and wonder, who built this? And why does it no longer feel like mine? You try to return to old joys, but they are tasteless. You revisit old beliefs, but they crumble in your hands. Even your spiritual practices begin to feel performative, like a ritual meant to summon a god that no longer answers. You are not lost, you are being emptied. The identity that once served you is being stripped away, not to punish, but to purify. And yet, in this death, there is no blueprint for rebirth. There is only waiting. Watching, noticing, the false self has died, but the true self has not yet spoken, and you cannot rush it. The soul does not speak in panic. It emerges only in stillness, only in honesty, only when the masks are fully laid down and the silence is complete. And in this silence, you begin to sense something ancient stirring beneath the rubble. Not a voice, not a command. Something more primal, a memory, a whisper, a knowing. You don't yet have the words for it. You may not even trust it, but it is there. Beneath the ashes of your former identity, something waits. Something that was never given to you, never taught, never performed. And so you remain here, in this in-between, in this sacred liminal space between death and becoming. You are no longer who you were, you are not yet who you will be, and in this void the soul listens. There comes a point after the false self dies and the illusions fall away, when silence is no longer empty. It begins to echo. And in those echoes something stirs, something long buried. It does not knock gently. It creeps, it watches, it waits. This is the shadow, the unseen twin of the self, the part of you you were taught to disown in order to be accepted, admired, controlled, or loved. The shadow is not evil, it is exiled. It is made of all the thoughts you denied, the desires you repressed, the instincts you labeled as wrong. Every time you smiled through pain, every time you swallowed your truth, every time you chose peace over authenticity, the shadow took a note. It held what you could not, and over the years it became heavy with your discarded self. Spiritual awakening does not eliminate the shadow, it invites it in. It opens the cellar door where the unconscious waits and asks you to walk down, barefoot and alone. The light you gained from awakening only sharpens the contrast. It makes the darkness clearer, closer, more intimate. You do not descend into the shadow as punishment. You descend to reclaim what was once abandoned. But confronting the shadow is not an act of heroism. It is an act of radical humility. You begin to see yourself without your mask, and it is disorienting. You see the envy that hid behind kindness, the resentment beneath your sacrifices, the pride masked as humility. You see how your goodness was often a strategy, how your morality was sometimes a performance, and it hurts, not because it is shameful, but because it is true. The world taught you to shine, but never to burn. And yet the shadow burns. It forces you to see that the parts of you you tried to kill have been alive the entire time, just waiting for permission to speak. These parts are not evil, they are wounded. The rage is a cry for boundaries. The jealousy is a hunger for love. The manipulation was a child's way of surviving abandonment. The addiction, the compulsion, the craving. Each one is a symbol, not a flaw. A message, not a moral failure, but to receive that message, you must stay, not escape, not rise above, not bypass through mantras or light. You must sit in the discomfort. You must feel the guilt that isn't yours. You must revisit the scenes you promised yourself you'd never relive. The memory of the moment you split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable. The moment you learned love must be earned. The moment you decided silence was safer than truth. This confrontation does not happen once. It happens in cycles, each time deeper, each time more honest. You may think you have healed only to be cracked open again by some trivial moment, a tone in someone's voice, a dream that lingers, a decision that paralyzes. That is how the shadow moves, not in grand gestures, but in subtle sabotage, revealing the unhealed parts not to torment you, but to invite you into intimacy with your own soul. To look into the shadow is to surrender certainty. It is to realize that you do not fully know yourself, that you have spent years trying to be good when you were called to be whole, that you can no longer distinguish between what you believe and what you were conditioned to believe. The shadow shows you where you are still performing, even for yourself, and yet, in this darkness, something unexpected begins to happen. The parts you feared begin to soften. The inner critic starts to sound tired rather than cruel. The shame, once suffocating, begins to feel more like sadness, and within that sadness is a door, not out of the shadow, but deeper into it. There is gold in this darkness, not the kind that sparkles, but the kind that grounds. The kind that cannot be taken by others because it was never built for display. It is the gold of authenticity, of knowing your limits, of choosing truth over comfort. It is the gold of becoming real, messy, imperfect, whole. But to reach it, you must be willing to sit with the parts of yourself that make others uncomfortable. You must befriend the voice you were told to silence. You must hold your own hand through memories that tremble. And you must do this not to fix yourself, but to find yourself, not the self that smiles in photographs, but the one that cries when no one is watching. And so you stay, you listen, you unearth, you remember. The shadow does not disappear, it integrates. It steps out of the cellar and joins you, not as an enemy, but as an ally, not to destroy, but to complete. And in that quiet reunion, there comes a point in the path of awakening when the outer world, once teeming with color and promise, begins to fade into gray, not because it has changed, but because you have. The machinery of culture, the endless striving, the awards for obedience, the praise for polished appearances, no longer moves you. You see it now for what it is, a tapestry of borrowed dreams stitched together by people who never dared to question the thread. Before awakening, you drank from this well with thirst. You shaped your desires to match the collective script. You believed in the myth of linear progress. Study hard, work hard, achieve, retire, die respected. You looked up to those who climbed the ladders, reached the heights, wore their success like armor. You too had a vision board, goals with checkboxes, timelines in your head. But now, all that scaffolding feels alien, almost childish, like a story told to keep you asleep. Disconnection begins subtly. A meeting that once thrilled you now leaves you numb. A compliment that once inflated your pride now feels hollow. A social gathering that once excited you now exposes a deep sense of loneliness, even in a crowded room. And gradually, what the world calls normal begins to feel unnatural. The smiles seem forced, the goals feel arbitrary, the noise, once intoxicating, now grates against your nervous system. You start to see how much of modern life is built on avoidance, of silence, of solitude, of soul. The collective ideal demands you stay busy, entertained, productive. It tells you that your worth is in your output, your beauty, your conformity. It seduces you with promises of happiness, but only if you follow the rules. Do more, get more, be more, and yet, as you awaken, you no longer know what more even means. It is not ambition you lack, it is agreement. You no longer agree with the game being played, not because you are better than it, but because you have seen through it. The promotions, the trophies, the followers, the applause, these are no longer your nourishment. They are symbols of a hunger you no longer feel. And without that hunger, the world begins to look at you differently. Colleagues think you've lost your edge. Friends wonder why you've changed. Family questions your choices. But how do you explain that you are not sick? You are simply no longer seduced. And yet, this disconnection brings no immediate joy. Only space, and within that space, an aching question. If I am no longer moved by the world's ideals, then what now? The answer does not arrive quickly, because to disconnect from collective ideals is not to float into clarity. It is to fall into ambiguity. You have stepped off the map, and the terrain ahead is unfamiliar. You cannot look to society for validation anymore. You cannot measure your worth by metrics you no longer believe in. And so, a kind of existential vertigo sets in. You may try to return, to force yourself back into old systems. You might revisit old dreams, put on the mask again, go through the motions. But something in you has changed at the cellular level. You cannot pretend to care about what your soul has outgrown. The illusion of importance is gone, and with it goes the adrenaline, the rush, the short-lived satisfaction. You begin to crave something quieter, slower, more real, but you do not yet know what that is. This is not rejection, it is separation. You are not fighting the world. You are simply stepping out of its trance. You are no longer hypnotized by its promises. You no longer believe that success means superiority, that suffering means virtue, that speed means progress, that noise means meaning. You have seen that the world praises masks and fears mirrors. You have become a mirror, and that mirror reflects not just your own emptiness, but the collective one too. You begin to see how many people are silently aching, smiling on the surface while their inner world collapses. You see how many live according to templates, never questioning if the life they built was ever their own. You begin to feel a strange compassion, not pity, for the ones still chasing, because you remember that you once chased too. But now you stand at the edge of the crowd, and the voices that once guided you have grown faint. The billboards look like illusions, the speeches sound rehearsed. Even the news once trusted now feels like theater. You are not immune, you are awake. And in that awakening, the world you once lived in begins to shimmer like a dream you've just woken from. You are not above it. You are simply outside it, not lost but untethered, not cynical but sober. The music of the collective still plays, but you no longer dance to its rhythm. You listen, you observe, but your feet are still. Your soul has heard another melody, faint, unfamiliar, ancient, one that does not shout, one that does not promise anything, one that asks only that you listen and follow, not outward, but inward. And in this inward gaze, there comes a silence after shedding, after the death of illusion, after the collapse of old self-images, after the exile of the false light. It is not a restful silence. It is not peaceful. It is not poetic. It is hollow, and yet this hollowness is sacred. It is the void. You arrive here not by choice, but by necessity. The path of spiritual awakening is often described as enlightenment, illumination, freedom. But no one speaks of this stage, not in sermons, not in books, not in comforting conversations, because this part cannot be romanticized. The void is not a punishment. It is a pause, a divine suspension between identities. A womb and a tomb at once. Here you no longer know who you are. You no longer know what to want. The tools you once used for survival, motivation, discipline, ambition, belief, they sit useless in your hands, like relics from a previous incarnation. You try to pray, and the words disappear before reaching your lips. You try to feel joy, but even the things you once loved now echo like distant memories. You are not depressed. You are disassembled. The void is not empty. It is so full that it overwhelms your ordinary senses. Time distorts. Days bleed into nights. The linear mind, desperate for progress, keeps asking, "What's next?" But there is no next. There is only this strange, unbearable stillness that stretches endlessly. You are not in motion, you are not healing, you are not becoming, you are unmaking. In this space you meet silence in its rawest form. Not silence as absence, but silence as presence. A silence that watches, a silence that strips, a silence that demands nothing but surrender. You look around and see that no one can walk this part with you. No teacher, no philosophy, no ritual will guide you now. You are too far from the shore of the known. This part of the journey requires only one thing, that you stay, and staying here is the hardest thing of all. The ego, terrified of formlessness, screams for resolution. It begs you to go back, to rebuild, to restart, to distract, to re-identify. But a deeper voice whispers, "No, remain." This voice is not loud. It is not persuasive. It does not negotiate. It simply waits. You are not failing. You are being undone. The soul knows that in order for something authentic to be born, everything inauthentic must dissolve, not in theory, but in reality. And so it withdraws your appetite for things that no longer serve you. It pulls you away from roles you can no longer play. It silences the music that once dictated your movements. And in the deafening stillness, you feel naked. Unnamed, unanchored, there are moments when you feel like a ghost, present but not fully here, floating through days, watching yourself from a distance, wondering when the spark will return. People ask how you are, and you do not know what to say. You speak, but the words feel like someone else's. You nod, smile, engage, but beneath the surface there is only fog, a soft, invisible nothingness that holds you, and still life continues. The world demands you participate, but inside everything has stopped. It is not apathy, it is transition. You are between the inhale and the exhale, between the dying and the becoming, and there is no map for this, no timeline, no promise. Only the ache of being remade. This is the winter of the soul, where growth is happening underground, where the seed does not sprout, but prepares, where nothing visible changes, yet everything internal shifts. You are not lost, you are in gestation, but gestation feels like death when you do not yet know what is being born. Here, in this void, you may find yourself revisiting memories unprovoked, not for analysis, but for release. You may dream strange dreams. You may feel emotions with no story. You may cry without knowing why, or laugh in moments of unbearable stillness. The psyche is recalibrating. The spirit is restructuring itself. You are being emptied not to be erased, but to be made ready. And as this void deepens, it begins to cleanse, not like a wave, but like a slow erosion. You no longer force what doesn't fit. You stop arguing with what is gone. You stop begging the universe to return you to who you were. That version of you cannot return, not because it was wrong, but because it is complete. Its purpose has ended, and so it dissolves into the soil of your inner world, fertilizing something not yet known. And in the silence, in the endless space of not knowing, something ancient stirs, not a plan, not a dream, not a new goal to chase, but a pulse, a rhythm, a breath not fully your own, yet undeniably within you. It does not speak, it moves, it is not loud, it is steady, and somewhere deep in the hollow of your chest you feel it, a quiet becoming. There comes a moment, often quiet, unceremonious, when the praise that once lit up your world no longer reaches you, not because it stopped coming, but because something inside you no longer recognizes it as food. You stand in a familiar space, perhaps even surrounded by admiration, but it passes through you like wind through a hollow chamber. And you realize, what once defined you can no longer sustain you. This is not pride. It is not rebellion. It is disillusionment. Before awakening, the approval of others acted like scaffolding. It held your sense of self in place. A compliment could lift your entire mood. A criticism could undo you. You shaped yourself, often unconsciously, around what would be celebrated, affirmed, rewarded. You mastered the art of being agreeable, inspirational, impressive. And it worked for a time. You became a character in the collective story, and your performance was applauded. But spiritual awakening begins the slow unraveling of this performance. You start to notice how your smile is sometimes reflexive, how your generosity sometimes hides a need to be liked. You see how your values were molded not from soul, but from expectation. And when you begin the painful process of becoming real, you also begin to lose your taste for applause. At first, this loss is confusing. You wonder why achievements feel hollow, why recognition now makes you uncomfortable, why compliments ring like echoes in an empty hall. The old self would have basked in them, but the old self has dissolved, and in its place stands a self that is quieter, deeper, and far less interested in spectacle. The world, however, has not changed. It still moves on currency made of likes, praise, titles, validation. And when you stop playing that game, when you stop needing to be seen to feel worthy, you begin to disappear from certain people's eyes. You are no longer exciting. You no longer perform on cue. You are no longer interested in proving your goodness, your genius, your evolution. You become dangerous to the collective because you cannot be seduced. And yet, there is no joy in this loss, only space. Vast, unfamiliar space where the sound of other people's opinions used to live. It is disorienting to no longer know where you stand in the eyes of others. You may still receive compliments, but now they feel like foreign languages. You may still be respected, but it no longer anchors you. And in that drifting, the ego panics. What am I without reflection, without validation, without praise to confirm my existence? You begin to see how deeply wired this hunger was, not just to be seen, but to be seen as good. To be acceptable, to be worthy of belonging. You see how early this pattern began, perhaps in childhood, when love was offered in exchange for performance, when affection was conditional, when your truth was too much, so you shrank it to be loved. And now, in awakening, that very shrinking no longer works. You cannot pretend. You cannot seek approval without betraying yourself. This is not a loss of ambition. It is a loss of dependency. You no longer need to be clapped for, because you no longer fear your own silence. You no longer decorate your identity with borrowed admiration. You no longer reach for validation as oxygen. Instead, you begin to inhale something subtler, something quieter, a knowing, not of who you are in society, but who you are when no one is watching. But this knowing does not arrive quickly. It builds slowly in the spaces where validation once lived, and in the meantime you feel exposed, not because you are visible, but because you are not. You walk through life without the armor of performance, and people don't know how to receive you. Some become uncomfortable around your authenticity. Others project onto your silence. Some interpret your withdrawal as arrogance, others as failure. But you are no longer here to correct them. This detachment is not indifference. It is intimacy with yourself, with the voice inside that was once drowned out by applause, with the part of you that has no interest in being understood, only in being whole, and this wholeness often looks like retreat, like solitude, like not participating in the dance of mutual admiration, not because you disdain it, but because you no longer need it to feel real. You begin to sense a power growing, not outwardly, but inwardly, a power that comes from not being moved by trends, opinions, judgments, a power rooted in self, containment, in the ability to witness your own becoming without needing anyone to confirm it. You do not demand that others see you clearly, you see yourself. You do not panic when they withdraw, you remain, and yet, this freedom has a weight to it. The weight of carrying your own value without external mirrors, the weight of choosing integrity over impression, the weight of walking away from places that celebrated your mask but never saw your soul. You become quieter, not because you are hiding, but because you are no longer broadcasting. You are learning how to be seen without performing, how to belong without bending, and in this stripped place, where only your inner voice remains, something begins to emerge, not a persona, not a role, not a version of you tailored for praise, but something ancient, unshaped, unmarketed. A presence that does not strive, a self that does not prove, a truth that does not negotiate. Amidst the desolation of lost motivation, the emptiness of vanished illusions, and the silence of stripped identity, there stirs a subtle whisper, almost inaudible yet persistent. It is a calling not heard by the ears, but felt in the depths of the being, a summons from a place beyond the familiar, beyond the achievements, beyond the comfort of what is known. This is the call to higher purpose. This calling is not a clarion trumpet. It does not shout commands or offer blueprints. It comes as a delicate vibration beneath the noise, a gentle tug on the soul's sleeve. It is often mistaken for restlessness, frustration, or even despair, because it disrupts the status quo. It unsettles the comfortable narratives that have held your life together. It does not promise ease or recognition. It only asks for attention. In the early stages of awakening, this call may be drowned out by the cacophony of old fears and desires. The ego, clinging to its last semblance of control, tries to silence it with distraction, with urgency, with the illusion of busyness, but the call persists. It is the echo of something vast and unknowable inside you, a beacon from a future self you have yet to meet. To answer this call requires courage unlike any you have known. It demands that you turn away from what you have built and step into the unknown. To let go of old attachments, the safety of recognition, the predictability of routine, the comfort of identity, and move toward a horizon that is visible only to the heart. It asks that you be willing to walk a path without guarantees, without maps, and without applause. This path is lonely not because you are abandoned, but because it is solitary by nature. Few understand the language of this calling. Few can accompany you into the territory where masks fall away and purpose is felt rather than defined. You may encounter resistance from within and without. The voice of doubt, the pressure of expectations, the pull of familiar comforts. All conspire to keep you small, to keep you safe. Yet the calling does not relent. It grows louder in the silence, stronger in the stillness. It awakens an ancient knowing that there is more to life than survival and success. That beneath the surface of everyday existence lies a deeper current, a river of meaning flowing towards something greater than yourself. This is not a promise of grandeur or fame, but a promise of alignment with the essence of who you truly are. In heeding this call, you begin to discover that higher purpose is not a destination, but a becoming. It is not a fixed goal to achieve, but a continuous unfolding of your deepest truth. It asks that you live with intention, with integrity, and with openness to the mysteries that lie beyond logic and reason. It requires you to listen to your heart, to the world, to the silent language of the soul. This calling often manifests as a restlessness that cannot be satisfied by external achievements. It may appear as a yearning for connection, for healing, for creation, or for service. It draws you toward acts of courage that may seem small in the world's eyes but monumental in the realm of spirit. It invites you to embrace paradox, to hold uncertainty and faith, doubt and hope, pain and joy, as equal companions on your journey. Answering the call means embracing the tension between who you have been and who you are becoming. It means surrendering old identities to birth new ones, shedding the skins of ego to reveal the essence beneath. It is a pilgrimage into the depths of your own being, where you meet not only your light, but also your darkness, and learn to integrate both into a wholeness that transcends division. In this sacred quest, you may feel the weight of responsibility pressing upon you, not as a burden, but as an invitation to participate in the unfolding of a greater story, one that weaves together the threads of personal transformation and collective awakening. You sense that your journey is not separate but intimately connected to the pulse of the world, to the cycles of nature, to the dance of existence itself. And so you stand at a threshold, a liminal space between what was and what might be. The call beckons you forward, not with certainty, but with promise, not with answers, but with questions, not with light at the end of the tunnel, but with the invitation to carry your own flame into the darkness, to become a beacon not for glory, but for truth. This is the call to higher purpose, a call that dissolves old motivations, that unsettles old identities, that disrupts old patterns. And in its disruption, it opens the door to a life lived not as a reaction to the world, but as a response to the sacred within, a life that is less about striving and more about surrender, less about achievement and more about becoming. And in this becoming, you realize that the journey itself is the purpose, the endless unfolding of the self into the vast mystery of existence. That to answer, the call is to step into the unknown with faith, to walk the path with humility, and to embrace the sacred dance of transformation without end.